Hello, and welcome to our new series of asynchronous virtual roundtables on reopening cities. An asynchronous virtual roundtable is one where the interviews have taken place separately at different times and have then been integrated into a single roundtable. At the end of the interviews, we will have a live synchronous Q&A session with several of the participants in the roundtable. Please use the Q&A feature of Zoom to ask your questions. I'm Hani Mahmassani. I'm director of the Northwest University Transportation Center, and I will be your moderator. Cities lie at the core of economic, social, and cultural activities and are the embodiment of human civilization. When we first envisioned the series, we were thinking of it as reopening cities post-COVID-19, but it looks like we're reopening cities with COVID-19 at this stage, and of course looking beyond COVID-19, so we will be addressing kind of both aspects when we talk about reopening cities. Public transportation plays a vital role in urban mobility and also plays a key role in reopening cities and our economies. And so today we're privileged to feature three leaders in the transit industry. First, we have Dorval Carter, who is president of the Chicago Transit Authority, followed by Peter Cafiero, who is managing director for intermodal planning for WMATA in the Washington, D.C. area. And then we will have Nat Ford, who is CEO of the Jacksonville Transit Authority. This virtual roundtable is part one of a two-part series dealing with public transportation and reopening cities. Today we're focusing on domestic public transportation, or rather public transportation in cities in the US. In the second part, which we intend to air next week, we will be dealing with cities outside the USA, more like the international experience, and we'll tell you more about that in due course. So Dorval, you're president of the Chicago Transit Authority, the nation's second largest transit agency, providing approximately 1.5 million rides on an average weekday, and serving the city of Chicago and, of course, the greater Chicago area. Since your appointment as president in 2015, you've led the way for an unprecedented investment in the CTA, overseeing more than $8 billion of projects completed, begun, or announced. And you've had a long and distinguished career in the transit and transportation industry, having spent more than 30 years in transportation and transit, including positions the US DOT and the Federal Transit Administration. So we're delighted again to have the opportunity to talk to you today, particularly about how the CTA has been kind of dealing with the whole COVID issue, and but we're gonna take a more positive view here, really talk about the vital role that public transportation does play, both during and most importantly post COVID-19. And so it's been more than 3 months, I guess, since lockdown orders, shelter-in-place orders had been promulgated, and with it, social economic activities have dramatically changed over that time, and not surprisingly, transit ridership has dropped considerably over that period. Cities and states, including our own city of Chicago, are now in various stages of relaxing restrictions, getting into phase 4 in Illinois, allowing some restaurants and retail establishments to open under specific cautious guidelines. And if you track like overall mobility indicators from cell phone data, for instance, these have really bounced back significantly as a result of relaxing these constraints, but there remains some apprehension towards transit use. And the CDC essentially warned people not to take transit if they don't have to. But we know that many essential workers really can't get to work without transit, especially in places like Chicago, DC, and New York. And our cities would choke without efficient public transportation. So the main theme for our conversation today is, how do you reconcile health-related concerns on one hand with the need for efficient mobility in our recovering cities? And how do we regain the public's trust that transit is capable of delivering safe and efficient mobility? So we're going to take it during, first of all, sort of the lockdown period, and then look at the current months or two, and then look beyond that. And during that lockdown period, what particular health-related challenges did the CTA encounter from March through May? And what mitigation strategies has CTA deployed for system-wide cleaning, disinfection to help ensure the health of its workforce? And how have these strategies evolved over time?
Sure. I think that, our first priority when the pandemic started was obviously the health and safety of our employees and our customers. And so we really focused and partnered very closely with the local health officials, the Chicago Department of Public Health in particular, to discuss what we should be doing and how we should be implementing the appropriate protocols to protect our employees and our customers. Obviously, one of the biggest challenges that we faced was the reality of the virus itself was an evolving discussion, and the guidance as a result changed over time. You may all remember that we started off with the guidance that masks are not necessary. And here we are today with the guidance that we should be encouraging mask use whenever possible. So a lot of the challenges came with the fact that no one knew enough about the virus to really give us definitive answers on what we should or should not do. You combine that with the fact that we didn't have the option of just shutting down for a month or so and figuring this all out. We were really practically building the plane as we were flying it. And that created its own set of challenges for us. There were a number of things that we did initially that we felt were foundational to our whole approach to dealing with the pandemic. We tripled the number of people who were doing cleanings of our vehicles. We doubled the number of cleanings we were doing in our stations every day. We deployed additional personnel out into the field to do cleanings of vehicles, both bus and rail, in between the times that they would return back to the terminal or the garage. We recognized above all else that the more cleaning we could do, the better, recognizing that when we started this, we were doing more cleaning than most transit systems were doing as part of the regular cleaning process. The other challenge that we faced was obviously the workforce. My workforce is primarily African American. A large percentage of them have underlying health conditions. And so I have a workforce that was very susceptible to the virus itself. And while CTA has not experienced nearly the level of workforce tragedies that New York has faced, we have had to deal with the fact that we've had well over 300 people sick from the coronavirus, and we've had 7 employees die as a result of the coronavirus. So, we've had to sort of manage not only our external activity, but also our internal activity, our communications to our employees, additional cleaning of our work, of our garages and terminals, the workspaces that people operated in, maximizing social distancing, totally rechanging and reconfiguring break rooms and things of that nature as a way to try to mitigate as much as possible the impact it was going to have on our overall ability to even provide service over this time. And we were facing absenteeism rates of nearly 20% on our rail and bus operators in the height of the pandemic. And that created its own set of challenges in terms of our ability to continue to maintain full service during this entire time.
Wow. I hadn't realized it had hit this directly in terms of the loss of life of CTA employees. I'm sorry to hear that. So of all of these challenges, these operational challenges that you mentioned, what would you say is the more challenging? Has it been the ability to maintain this cleaning schedule? You've alluded to the health of workers. What about adjusting schedules? Have you engaged in doing much of that to sort of address changing ridership patterns, or has it been external events in some cases, like the protests, for instance?
Right. Yeah, yes, the protests on top of everything else. We did do some things. First of all, one of the things that we did not do was cut service. We may have been the only major transit system in the country that did not reduce service during the beginning or the initial phase of the pandemic. And part of the reason that we did that was a recognition on our part that transit inherently creates capacity issues in terms of social distancing. And our basic philosophy was the more service we could put out on the street, the more safer we could make it for our customers to use our service. And you need to recognize we lost about 80% of our ridership during the peak of the stay-at-home order. But even at 80% loss, we were still carrying well over 250,000 people a day. These were primarily essential workers who had to get to hospitals or to their grocery store jobs and things of that nature. And that ridership is more than the regular ridership on many transit systems will carry on a regular day. And so for that small group of people, it was really important that we continue to provide service 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at a level that they could expect. What we did do, we saw a much lower drop in ridership on the bus side of our operations than on the rail side. And so we did start to move bus service around in a way to maximize the routes that we saw challenges in terms of crowding and social distancing, to basically provide more capacity for people to use those bus routes, which we found in our case to be primarily on the south and west side of the city, which coincidentally is also where you have the heaviest minority population in the city, which would be where a lot of your essential workers would be coming from. And so we worked really hard to try to create flexibility in the bus side of our service to really move the buses around in a way that could provide more capacity where we needed it, and take away capacity where it wasn't being used. And it was fairly effective in that regard. But primarily, we just focused on keeping the maximum amount of service out on the street that we could, given the challenges that we were facing.
Mm-hmm. So looking at the current situation, June, July period, I believe that CTA has encouraged travel on its network for only essential workers, or at least for essential travel. That even with Chicago moving to phase 4 of its reopening plan, CTA is still recommending other mobility services for non-essential travel. How is CTA working with or informing riders of alternative mobility options?
Well, I mean, we're working closely with CDOT, Chicago Department of Transportation, who is our partner in the other services that are offered. And we've been discussing and continue to discuss with the city ways in which we can promote those alternative services on our system, as well as support the alternative services that they're offering. And I think one of the things that we really tried to focus on was sort of, a thoughtful approach to transit ridership. I think that's the phrase that we use. In that, we want you to use CTA when you need to, but when you don't, for short trips, you can walk, you can bike, you can take other mobility options. We want to encourage you to take advantage of those. And so it's been captured as part of our overall messaging as we tell people to come back to CTA, recognizing that, we can't carry the capacity or the loads of people that we would normally carry safely. And we need a much more broader umbrella of mobility, which fortunately a city like Chicago has, to accommodate those non-essential trips or those shorter trips, and keep the CTA service available for those essential workers who need CTA as their only alternative to get to and from their work or other critical activities.
So related to that, that gets us into the notion of socially distant transit ridership. Is that currently a hard restriction or a desirable target when possible? And what has CTA's experience been in that regard so far? And particularly, how cooperative have riders been? Has there been a need for enforcement, conflict resolution related to that?
Right. Obviously, public transportation and social distancing are two conflicting terms. The basic concept of mass transportation is mass, and trying to operate a public transportation system in a social distanced way is very difficult to achieve. We believe that enforcement comes through education and learning. We obviously don't have the capacity to physically enforce the requirements that we are placing on our capacity limits within our system. But we do have the ability to educate our customers about those limits and making sure that they understand that on the bus we have 15 and on rail we have 20 people that we are basically trying to limit per car or per bus. And the idea here is that as we educate our customers about this, they have a certain level of self-accountability and responsibility to monitor their use in a way that ultimately achieves those goals. We've also worked very hard to make sure we're putting more tools in the hands of our customers. We've developed a dashboard for our bus service that shows the times a day when the bus is likely to be more crowded based on the route that you may want to take. We're developing a similar product for the rail system. And we're also obviously having conversations with a number of the big tech giants in the tech world to talk about how we might be able to pursue some sort of real-time information around that data, just like we do for bus arrival and train arrival times. So our approach to this has been educate our customers, provide them with the tools to make good transit decisions, and basically through that process, we are able to enforce our expectations on the use of CTA. And I would say that, we're having modest success with that. I mean, I don't think that we have crush load trains at this point like we would normally have. A lot of that also has to do with the conversations that we're having with the business community about staggering work shifts and not having everybody come in at the same time and leave at the same time, and those sort of things that kind of help us sort of manage the capacity that we have.
Mm-hmm. So kind of the information you mentioned, essentially extending the tracker app to include information on crowdedness in real time. Okay, that'd be nice.
Right, that's sort of future phase for us, but we recognize one of the things that we spend a lot of time talking about here at CTA is innovation and flexibility. Mm-hmm. Transit has to be much more flexible now than it's ever been before because of the restrictions that we're dealing with in order to operate safely. Mm-hmm. And innovation through technology is one of the ways in which you're able to efficiently use the capacity that you have. And so whether it's through dashboards that we're putting on our website, or through new technology that will allow us to provide more real-time information and data around that, we believe that is the future to how you get customers comfortable with using CTA and making good decisions about how to use CTA in a safe and efficient way.
So the UITP, of course, that I'm sure you're familiar with, yes, has been compiling data from transit agencies around the world on how, essentially on ridership trends, particularly as different cities are reopening with different measures and strategies. And particularly if you look at Europe, which entered reopening phases earlier than most cities in the US, we've seen ridership rebound to somewhere between 60 to 30%, I would say, pre-COVID levels. I don't believe we're quite there yet in the US in terms of, say, 30% of pre-COVID levels when you look at the system overall. But is the CTA looking to some of these other cities for potentially useful operational and messaging practices?
Absolutely. And I think if you talk to any of my colleagues, we all talk about the fact that there was no pre-written model or approach to dealing with this. And we're an industry that likes to liberally borrow from each other when we see something that is successful. And I'm on a number of task forces with APTA, our industry group, working through best practices, identifying techniques and approaches that other transit systems are applying around the world I am scouring myself through the media and others, stories of things, and my staff is probably sick of all the emails they get from me with articles attached to them of things that I'm hearing somebody's doing in London or in Munich or in other cities around the world, not to mention here in the United States. And so because there's no playbook for what any of us are dealing with here, we've all recognized the fact that, understanding and hearing what other agencies are doing and what works for them is a big part of the education process. I will say this, though, as just a cautionary note. If you visited one transit system, you've seen one transit system. What works in one city may not work in another. And so a lot of the effort is in understanding what people are doing and then determining how and if it can work in an environment like Chicago or the CTA.
Are there any really promising good ideas out there that you're considering trying?
Well, we're looking at a lot of stuff. There's a lot of discussion around ultraviolet cleaning right now, and we're taking a look at ways in which we can improve that. A lot of the messaging that we're putting up on our system today is messaging that we've seen applied in Europe in advance in terms of the decals, the ways in which you promote social distancing, the methods by which you communicate your information to your customers. These are all things that we're utilizing as part of our strategy as we're rolling out new information and really continue to evolve our messaging strategy to reflect the reality of what we're seeing happen with our customers as we move forward.
So clearly rebuilding the public trust and building public confidence in transit involves soliciting feedback, I guess, from riders, right, to gain insight into how they're reacting, how they're perceiving things. How is CTA soliciting such feedback? Are there any formal customer satisfaction tracking programs underway, or is it mostly anecdotal or ad hoc?
Well, certainly through social media, you get more of the anecdotal feedback, and that obviously has always been sort of a real-time barometer for CTA on what our customers are experiencing on our system.
You get the negative side as well. More,
yes, it is. Yeah, that's the other part of it. It can be a very negative side of it. But no, we have also done customer surveys. We just completed one, and we plan to continue to do more. We've also are partnering with MIT to do some additional work and analysis on customer feedback and behavior as we continue to reopen our system and to see more customers come back. We're also spending a lot of time talking to the business community, the chambers of commerce and other things, to find out from them what they're hearing from their employees about riding CTA and making sure that we're educating them on the things that we're doing to make their employees' experience comfortable and safe, while also educating them on the things that they can do to help support public transit and the capacity constraints that we're facing as we go forward. And you're going to see that ramp up even more as we go later into the summer, into the early fall. Based on the feedback that we've gotten from a lot of employers right now, most of them are not looking to start to have employees come back to work until this fall. A lot of them are going to continue to use teleworking as appropriate, and then sort of dip their toe into the return to work status, which is good for us because it's given us time to basically make sure that we're getting our messaging out there and that we're prepared for what may be the gradual increases that you're seeing in Europe that we hope will eventually happen here in the United States.
So looking ahead in the sort of medium term and longer term, I believe CTA has indicated that it will meet the new normal with innovation, agile and data-driven service delivery and creative investments in our people and infrastructure to ensure public transportation helps to drive our recovery. So what kind of innovations, I guess, or data-driven strategies is CTA pursuing at this time to manage service and communication with customers? And what kind of creative investments, I guess, in people or infrastructure are you contemplating, again, to drive toward recovery?
Well, and I think you've heard me mention some of it in my previous answers. I talked about, some sort of real-time demand data that we can give to our customers. We're also in the process of updating our app, the Ventra app, which is our Fare Media app that's going to allow integration with Divvy Bike, which is our bike sharing system here in Chicago. That will allow you to basically reserve a bike and pay for that directly through our application. That'll be coming out this fall. We also have, we're working on improving our contactless payment system. As you know, our Ventra Fare Media system is one of the most advanced, technologically advanced fare media systems in the country. But we're looking at ways to improve that and to maximize the ability for our customers to use contactless payment as much as possible. And so I think you're going to see a lot of activity in that arena as we go forward. We're in conversations with Google. We're in conversation with Microsoft. We're in conversation with all of the tech giants right now about things that they're working on that could be applied to a public transit environment. And while I can't give too much of that away today, I would just say stay tuned. You're going to see a whole lot more in that regard. On the infrastructure side, like I said, we're looking at ultraviolet cleaning and ways in which we can incorporate that into our system. We're already doing electrostatic cleaning of our trains and buses as a way to basically further improve the cleaning that we're doing. We'll continue to ramp that up and to improve upon that. And we're also looking at, other investments like vending machines that can distribute personal protective equipment in our systems. We're looking at hand sanitizer dispensers that could be used to basically provide customers with the ability to get hand sanitizer at certain key stations. So there's a lot that's in the pipeline that we're working on that I think you'll see roll out over the course of the summer and later this year that will further enhance the customer's comfort with riding CTA, while recognizing that, technology can be a tremendous tool to our advantage, and embracing that technology and welcoming companies with products that can help us better manage our customers and to provide better support for our customers in using CTA is sort of a cornerstone of our overall plan. And then finally, I would just say, and yes, we have to be flexible. This virus, if it's taught me one thing, is that you can't predict what it's going to do next. And that means that if things change and we have to modify our strategies to reflect that, we have to be prepared to do that. And I think that we're always keeping one eye on what the local health and CDC and others are saying about the pandemic, and what things they're encouraging us to do that can be helpful in that, and looking at how we apply that to the way in which we operate our service here in Chicago.
So looking at more strategic, questions, the reduction in ridership has certainly impacted fare box revenue. How have federal and state programs helped mitigate, funding issues, and what is the outlook for continued support?
Well, I think it's safe to say that the federal funding has been a lifesaver for CTA. We have lost over $1 million a day in revenue because of the pandemic. And if it were not for the federal funding that we received under the CARES Act, we would not be providing anywhere near the level of service that we're providing today. Transit systems like mine and others around the country rely tremendously on fare box revenue as one of the primary sources of subsidy for our service. And when we lose that, we don't have a lot of other places to go financially to replace it. We have done well. We've received over $800 million at CTA from the CARES Act. We believe that will get us through this year. But we also recognize that ridership is not coming back right away. There's a reality that there could be a second wave this winter, combined with the flu that could result in an even more precipitous drop in the ridership that we're seeing. We already know socially that the messages that people are getting about if you're sick, stay home will certainly impact the number of people who are riding this winter than would normally, say, yeah, I don't feel well, but you know what, I think I can sort of, muster through it. So we expect that we're going to see ridership dip, much less deal with reality that it's not even going to be close to what we're used to seeing. And so there's no question we're going to need additional support. I am optimistic that we're going to see that. The House has certainly exhibited a willingness to fund an additional relief package that would include funding for public transit. And we're hopeful that the Senate will follow suit. But if we don't get it, then I think that it's going to be a very, very difficult time for any public transit system in this country without additional federal support to keep us going. And I think it's important to make the point that public transit is going to be a part of the economic recovery that we're facing in the cities and states. And so if you don't continue to find a way to keep us operating, then you are going to have a much bigger economic challenge going forward, because if we're not operating, your economic recovery is going to be impacted by that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So staying with the strategic dimensions here in terms of will demand come back, will travel patterns be the same, and so on. As you know, there's a lot of speculation going on that now that we've all teleworked, or that many people who can have teleworked, things will permanently change. And I happen to be on the side of those who say, we've had many such predictions in the past. Whenever you've had disruptions because of earthquakes, Olympic Games, and so on, where people were teleworking, and the idea was things will not be the same again. And almost every time they've gone back to what they were and more. So we've had congestion, we've had more congestion, and so on. And so do you foresee a similar return to typical work and travel behavior as I do, or is this time really different?
Wow, if I had a crystal ball to figure that one out. I think you're right to some degree. Eventually we will get back to a travel pattern that we recognize from our past experience. However, I also believe that it won't be exactly the same. I think that the teleworking environment has opened up opportunities to businesses that hadn't really considered them before. I think that the possibility of satellite offices as opposed to everyone coming downtown may play itself out to some degree as businesses start to rethink their overall business model in terms of where do they need their employees and when do they need them to conduct their work. But what I do believe is that a transportation network of some sort, of similar to what we have today, is critical to the overall economic vitality of a city like Chicago going forward. And the responsibility that I have as the head of this agency is to both manage and monitor those trends and to adjust accordingly. And we're already having conversations about what that may look like. Where are the opportunities for me to possibly rethink or reimagine how my bus service could operate in a different type of environment? Are there opportunities to do other things with technology that we haven't pursued in the past that could be beneficial to that type of travel pattern that is much different than the traditional travel pattern that has you coming from outside, into the central business district and back out again. As you know, our system was built on that spoke approach to commuting, and not only CTA but Metro and Pace were all built that way. And so I think that we have to be prepared to recognize where those other opportunities exist. And this isn't new for us in public transit. It's part of our daily lives. We're always trying to manage and understand what people want to do with their travel and how do we best support it in a way that allows us to receive the economic benefit of those trips. And so I see that continuing as we go forward with the understanding that, the pandemic itself, unlike a hurricane or an earthquake, has a length to it that no one really can predict right now. And the impact it has because of that, I think, is the big unknown that we all still have to kind of face as we move forward.
Yeah. So pre-COVID, of course, we had seen TNC providers, the Ubers, Lyft, et cetera, kind of maybe take away some market share from conventional transit. And we've also seen instances where there had been some cooperation, or at least try to leverage some complementarity that may exist between the two. Clearly, the pandemic has changed that interaction and that role. Do you see more of an opportunity, I guess, for CTA for enhanced cooperation with DNC providers and also bike share services to enable in the short term mobility for non-essential travel, but also in the longer term in terms, again, of leveraging, I guess, the potential benefits that each could provide?
Well, as you stated, my industry has already been going through some sort of a transformation around mobility as a service that started long before the pandemic occurred. Do I think that it might be accelerated to some degree because of the pandemic? I think the answer to that is yes. What's that going to look like? I don't know. We are certainly having conversations with the ride-hailing companies. We obviously are in conversations with Divvy, and I mentioned the integration that we're doing there. I think that, a big part of that conversation is also what businesses start to do around that environment as well, in terms of what they're willing to support or subsidize for their employees and how that ultimately plays itself out in this environment. But the one thing that I do know from a mobility standpoint is that no alternative has the capacity that public transit has to move as many people within a isolated period of time from one point to another. And so whatever the future is going to look like around this, it's going to be an integrated approach that's going to involve public transit along with, Uber and Lyft and Divvy Bike and everything else. I think that the willingness to have the conversation about how to better integrate all those things is probably much more prevalent today than it was 6 months ago. And certainly we are looking at what the implications of that would be for CTA and public transit that we provide, and ways in which we can more efficiently take advantage of these other opportunities in ways that make sense to us financially, but also to ultimately support our customers and giving them the most effective and efficient way to move around a city the size of Chicago.
Exactly, absolutely. Well, this has been extremely informative. I thank you very much for your insight today. Do you have any final thoughts for us?
No, I think that your questions were very thought-provoking. I think that, transit has always had a history of doomsday scenarios of, the death cycle and all these other things that we've had to live with. And Lord knows I've heard, over the course of my career, these conversations about public transit over and over again in terms of, is this the death knell of public transit? It's this thing that's going to basically eliminate it. I think the answer to that is no. What it will do is that it will make us better once we get through this, and that the mobility options that residents of the city of Chicago will have will be greatly improved and possibly accelerated in terms of implementation from where they would have been 6 months ago had we not gone through this. So if there's any silver lining in the reality of what we're dealing with here, and I say that in quotes, is the fact that it is forcing the type of dialogue and conversation around innovation and opportunity that would have taken more time to create outside of this environment. And we are certainly looking to embrace that and looking for ways in which we can leverage that to support public transit and to ultimately support the people who need us and need this city to be able to operate efficiently and have people be able to move around this city as effectively as possible to keep the city growing.
Well, thank you very much. And I do hope that you consider us in Northwestern also as partners with you in this process. So
absolutely.
Thank you for your time. Thank you. Peter, you're WMATA's Managing Director of Intermodal Planning, where you lead an integrated group of service planners, data analysts, schedulers, and bus stop maintenance staff for Metrorail and Metrobus in the National Capital Region. Before that, you were with the New York City MTA, New York City Transit, where you headed planning for the Second Avenue subway and New York's first BRT routes, led international transit benchmarking groups. So you have amazing depth of experience, I guess, in the transit industry and in urban transportation. We're delighted that you received your master's degree from Northwestern University. So we're always pleased and proud of our distinguished graduates. So we're going to talk today about transit. You know, it's been over 3 months since the lockdown orders were put in place, and with it, social economic activities have dramatically changed. Transit ridership, not surprisingly, has dropped considerably over this period. But cities and states are now in various stages of relaxing restrictions, allowing restaurants, retail to open under certain guidelines. And if you track mobility indicators like cell phone data, for instance, those have really bounced back significantly as a result of the reopening. But there's still some apprehension towards transit use, and the CDC all but basically warned people not to take transit. But many essential workers can't get to work without transit, especially in places like DC, like New York and Chicago. And our cities would choke effectively without an efficient public transportation system. So the main theme of our conversation today is about reconciling health-related concerns, if not fears, with the need for efficient mobility in our recovering cities and how to regain the public's trust that transit is capable of delivering safe and efficient mobility. So first, I want to talk about public health with you. What particular health-related challenges did WMATA encounter from March through May and June? And what mitigation strategies has WMATA deployed for system-wide cleaning, disinfection? How have these changed over time, and how has WMATA helped ensure the health of its workforce?
Right. So there have been a lot of challenges with keeping both of our employees and our customers safe. And without our employees, we would not even be in business. So that's been our focus. One of the early things we did, which was a huge challenge, but I think paid off, was that we split our workforce into two separate groups. We call them A and B groups that work alternate days and don't ever meet each other. So we were trying to protect against someone testing positive and then quarantining a whole division's worth of employees. We also, as many cities did, blocked off the area in the front of the bus, as well as the first and last cars on our rail trains, to separate employees from customers, and again, try to reduce that risk of employees getting exposed to the virus. We closed a number of stations that were very low volume stations or stations with a lot of alternatives, and that was both to reduce risk, but also to conserve cleaning supplies. In the very beginning, it was really hard to source a lot of the materials that we needed to keep the system clean and sanitized. And we've been sanitizing whenever there was a positive case identified. We went in and sanitized the facilities, did a lot of cleaning. And the impact on the workforce was substantial. Over the course of this, between a quarter and a third of our entire workforce has been out at one point or another. Mostly, thankfully, not positive, but many were exposed to positives, or under the advice of their physician were not coming into work. So those have been challenges that we have been working through in this. I'm happy to say that so far we've had some employees hospitalized, but none right now. So it's all been fairly positive, but it's still been a big impact.
So what have been the most challenging operational aspects during this, March through May period? Has it been the WMATA's ability to maintain this cleaning schedule and sourcing supplies and so on? Was it the health of workers? Was it adjusting schedules to address ridership patterns, or other events such as protests?
Well, I'm sure, like everyone else certainly in the US, we've had challenges with all of those. I think, from my perspective as managing service planning and schedules and working with operations, the biggest challenge that we've had by far is managing the service levels to move our customers, particularly our essential employees, but also to fit within the workforce that we had available. So adapting those services and schedules, often on the fly, often overnight that we had to make changes, have been a challenge. And then to line up all of the onboard data systems, which were never designed to be that flexible, both to make sure our employees were paid properly, to try to get customer information as to what we were actually running. Those have been the biggest challenges that I've been involved in. But, all the things you mentioned were challenges that we are struggling with.
So looking at more the present situation, June, July, I believe on Sunday, June 28th, WMATA reopened 15 rail stations and is adding bus service to its 14 busiest routes. So these are, again, positive developments, but it's also temporarily suspending service on 4 lower ridership routes. And this kind of reassignment of frequency typically happens to adjust to ridership. How has the reopening and realignment of service gone so far? And is WMATA mostly encouraging travel for essential purposes, or it's kind of broadened the message like we're safe, come and use transit?
Well, I think we're transitioning right now, and from that first message and action to a more open environment. The stations that were closed, as I mentioned, were done very early for resource reasons, but our philosophy is to try to stay one step ahead of the ridership returning. Our GM has made it clear that it's not like turning on a light switch. We can't go back to full strength, but we want to try to stay one step ahead. Those bus adjustments you mentioned were trying to address some crowding we were seeing on key routes that served essential employees and transit-dependent areas. But we still have a very constrained workforce, so we had to make some adjustments on routes where we were just not seeing ridership, or there were a lot of other alternatives. And so that's basically been our philosophy. I think so far it's working well, but we will see how we're all on unmapped territory right now, and particularly as we see where the virus goes and how travel goes into the fall, it'll be all interesting, and we're trying to keep enough resources in reserve to adjust and be flexible.
So the big question for the industry has been the notion of socially distant, I guess, transit ridership. Is that a hard restriction? Because I know for a while that, you could only have so many riders and some seats were blocked, etc. Is that a hard restriction, or is it a desirable target when possible? And what has WMATA's experience been in that regard so far, and how cooperative have riders been? And as an aside, I will mention, I took my first flight a couple of days ago, and the flight was full. Everybody was wearing masks though, and it was imposed by the airline. And so that kind of compensated, I guess, to some extent for the fact that social distancing was not maintained on the vehicle. How is transit approaching this, and particularly WMATA?
Well, we recognize and try to explain that we're a public transit. At the end of the day, we're a public transit vehicle. We're really not able to enforce restrictions. We know that families are going to travel together. They're not going to follow where seats are, things like that. Our goal is to try, as I said, to stay ahead of the ridership, to try to allow for customers to be 6 feet apart. That reduces our capacity to probably about 25 to at most 30% of what we normally have. So it's not sustainable in the long term. We are now requiring masks, and I think that the sense is going forward, we're going to rely on a partnership with our customers and us providing as much service as possible to maintain the distance, to look out for each other. So far, they seem to be doing that.
So Peter, according to data from the UITP, the International Organization of Transit Properties, European cities that have entered reopening phases, and Europe has been a little bit ahead of the US in terms of the recovery process. You know, they've seen ridership rebound to about anywhere between 70 to 30% of the pre-COVID levels.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe we're quite there yet in US cities, and I haven't seen the data from WMATA. But is WMATA looking to some of these other cities for potentially useful operational and messaging practices?
Absolutely. One of the things that I really like about the transit industry is the public transit industry is that we have really built a lot of international and North American contacts, and we're probably multiple times a week on panels and webinars and discussions internationally to learn what's going on, try to see where that curve is headed, and learn from each other, because we're all facing the same challenges. As you mentioned, Europe is between 1 and 2 months ahead of where we are in North America in terms of their reopening. So we're really trying to learn from that, from our peers over there.
Okay, so is WMATA soliciting feedback from its riders to gain insight into operations and particularly the recovery process? And how is this helping to create perhaps more confidence in the ridership and in the public in general? And are there any formal sort of customer satisfaction tracking programs underway? I know you and I are like analytics, or is it mostly anecdotal so far?
Well, as you mentioned, I've been at Washington Metro now for the last year, and I've been very impressed with, even before COVID, with our level of market research here and the support for planning and other aspects of the agency. But our market research groups at Washington Metro have been very proactive from the early days of the pandemic, reaching out to their customers that had registered for market research, and doing focus groups, home surveys, mail surveys, to try to understand what customers' concerns would be when they were coming back at some point in the future to work. And one of the things that we learned pretty quickly was a very high level of concern about cleaning. And really, the customers really wanted to see visible cleaning going on all the time. And that's a challenge, because the most effective cleaning is done overnight when it's closed, the system's closed. So we're adapting our messaging to try to convey what we're doing so that our customers can feel comfortable coming back. We're also have surveyed our customer base as well as employers in the region to understand their plans for reopening. One thing we have here in DC is that one of the largest employers locally is the federal government. So we continue to speak with them about their plans and trying to understand that. So it will be an ongoing process, I think, to both plan for return of workers, of students to school, which is another big challenge that I know all of the transit agencies are probably trying to anticipate. A significant number of our riders, particularly on buses, are students. And so that's still not completely clear, I think. Yep. But I think dialogue and explanation are going to be going a long way to helping us through this.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's not clear to the universities and schools either. So it's a lot of uncertainty at this point about that. So looking ahead, Peter, kind of near, medium term and beyond, one of the elements that we've tried to understand, across the board in the transportation industry is how data, technology, innovation, and so on, what role that is playing in dealing with disruption, dealing with the crisis, and the extent to which perhaps new practices might have emerged during this period. So could you maybe tell us a little more about how WMATA might be using data to monitor ongoing progress and development? What kind of data, what kind of indicators do you look at? How is that collected? how much of that was already underway pre-COVID, or are there sort of new innovations and I guess or data-driven strategies that WMATA might be pursuing at this time to manage service and communications with customers? Any new initiatives in that regard, or perhaps repurposing existing initiatives from that standpoint?
Well, I would say, firstly, in terms of the existing data, that's been a significant challenge. As I mentioned before, a lot of the systems that we have, particularly on buses, relied on knowing what the vehicle was supposed to be doing, what schedule it was on. And we pretty early in the crisis tossed all the schedules out. And so a lot of those data streams stopped or became wildly inaccurate. At the same time, we lost fare box data because we stopped collecting fares when we went to backdoor only. So we've struggled, and pretty much very quickly we're able to find some data streams that still worked and weren't 100% accurate, but were good enough for us to know broad trends. We've been working on refining them as we can better understand their accuracy. But that's an ongoing challenge. I would love to have better hard data about travel, particularly outside of our transit system. We've talked to some of the other operators in the departments of transportation to try to share data on what travel patterns are and how they're changing. I know there is there's a wealth of new data out there from third parties about travel in general in a region. I would love to have part of that and be part of that, but that we're not there yet. We're also talking to companies that are perhaps able to better capture real-time onboard data that can help us and can tell our customers how crowded vehicles are, which is something that I think customers are very interested in. And a number of cities, particularly in Europe, are way ahead of us in being able to do that real time.
So you mentioned farebox, so that's my next question. That the reduction in ridership has certainly impacted farebox revenue, but also the fact that you were not collecting fares for a while. How have federal and state programs helped mitigate the funding issues, the funding shortfall, and what is the outlook for continued support? I know it's a hard question, a lot of uncertainty,
right.
But what can you tell us about it at this stage?
Well, in the U.S. and in D.C., the CARES Act funding for transit was a lifesaver. I mean, we would all be, ground to a halt by now without that. And in D.C., it's allowed us, with some significant belt tightening on our side, to get through the short term. In the longer term, though, clearly we will all have challenges. And I just today was reading more news articles about how transit is going to be challenged nationally as we move forward. A lot of it will depend on how quickly we gain control of the virus and the economy returns, and how quickly we can convince customers to come back to our system.
Okay, so this is going even further in terms of long-term and speculation here, but there's this conversation that's going on, or I guess predictions possibly that are going around in the planning community, that now that people have been working from home and telework and so on, that sort of travel patterns will not be the same. But as a transportation analyst myself, we know that history has shown that past predictions of widespread moves to teleworking because of major disruptive events, whether it's earthquakes, Olympic Games, and so on, have really not materialized. So there's always that expectation that none of that demand is going to come back, and every single time, we're kind of ended up the same place, and with even more congestion, etc. So do you foresee a similar return to typical work and travel behavior, or is this time really different?
Well, I'm a big optimist about cities. And in the long term, I think I agree with you. There's always these predictions of doom and gloom or the opposite. I think crises like these accelerate changes that were already underway, but they don't necessarily do a U-turn. And I think cities are, have had millennia worth of growth and long-term improvements and increases, and particularly more recently, I think from an environmental and an economic point of view, they are going to always be important. And transit's going to be important for cities to remain functional as well as environmentally sustainable. So I'm optimistic in the longer term, but I think it will accelerate some changes we were already seeing, which is the changes from people going into work 5 days a week to maybe 4 days or not every day, and we'll see how we adapt to that. Generally, when people have stopped traveling for one reason, they start traveling for different reasons, and over time, I think that transit can play a role in those trips as well, and we need to be flexible. We need to work probably with other modes that people are using as well to try to stay part of people's lives. But I'm pretty optimistic in the longer term. In the shorter term, it's going to take years probably to get back to where we were.
So another kind of more strategic questions here. Pre-COVID, there was that whole notion of that TNC providers were taking market share, I guess, from transit and from private auto, in fact. And kind of that discussion about, is it competition or is it more, complementarity perhaps in terms of the services? Do you see at this point an opportunity for more or less cooperation with TNC providers and also bike share services to enable mobility for non-essential travel in the near term, and then possibly in the longer term? How's that sort of equation changing, or is no one really worrying about it?
Well, I think that industry's gotten a big hit too in all this. So it's been interesting. Yes, we were very worried about that shift, as well as the congestion that they were creating and its impacts to our service as well. We did at WMATA have a partnership pilot with TNCs, but really weren't able to take advantage of that during this crisis. We did actually use, in limited cases, our ADA paratransit services to provide some links that we were not able to do with our regular service. So there is perhaps a benefit to having some flexible alternative providers that we should look at down the road. I think that in the longer term, as I mentioned before, I think certainly people who might choose to take bicycles for some trips, but want to be able to interchange with or have an alternative with the transit provider might be helpful for us to maintain that relationship with them. In the shorter term, when we're trying to not have as many people at our peak load points, that can be a big help because those are going to be shorter trips, leave the capacity for people who are traveling greater distances.
So Peter, it's been extremely informative and insightful. Do you have any final thoughts for us?
Well, one other thing that I think, and I mentioned this before with the TNCs, I mean, one of the things that we have been following, particularly in Asia, which is a couple months ahead of us in reopening, is that their traffic congestion came back very quickly, and they're at pre-COVID levels of street traffic because people were taking single occupancy private cars as their first choice. And that's a real concern moving forward. And so we've been working, as of other cities, but we've been working closely with particularly the District Department of Transportation to see how we can get some bus priority measures put in place before all the traffic comes back. There's limits. Unfortunately, there's funding limits. There's other challenges. So it's never going to be as much, I think, as we would want. But we're very happy that that they've been very supportive, and we'll try to do that where we can together do that. I think that's going to be key, particularly for bus transportation moving forward, is being able to get buses to function better than they did in the past to serve what's proven in this crisis to show that bus transportation in general has served some really key critical workers and transit-dependent areas. And when we stripped out all of the other riders who could stay home, that's when you saw the people who really needed to use their services. And for the first time in probably 4 decades, we are still carrying more people on buses here than we are on rail. So rail has a key role to play. I'm not saying it doesn't, but we really need to do better with our bus system.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much, Peter. Appreciate your time today. Thank you. So, Nat, you're Chief Executive Officer of the Jacksonville Transportation Authority and past chair of the American Public Transportation Association. You've had a distinguished career that's spanning more than 3 decades, including 10 years as CEO of the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency and the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority. You've been a champion of multimodal transportation, walkable neighborhoods, public-private partnerships, and transit-oriented development. And you're known for industry-leading insights and thought leadership on international transportation issues from trade and study missions around the world. So we're going to talk today about how COVID has impacted the transit industry, and more importantly, how transit is playing a vital role in reopening our cities. During the sort of the early part, I guess, between March and May, you know, many places, of course, had lockdown orders, and with that, social economic activities have dramatically changed, and transit ridership, not surprisingly, has dropped considerably over this period in most cities around the world. As cities and states are in various stages of relaxing restrictions, allowing restaurants, retail establishments to open under specific guidelines, we've seen overall mobility indicators, say from cell phone data, bounce back significantly as a result, but there's still some apprehension towards transit use. And the CDC has essentially warned people not to take transit. Of course, we know that many essential workers can't get to work without transit, and many of our larger cities would choke without an efficient public transportation system. So one of our main themes here today is about reconciling the health-related concerns on one hand, and on the other hand, the need for efficient mobility in our recovering cities, and how to gain the public's trust that transit is capable of delivering safe and efficient mobility. So first, I want to talk public health with you. What particular health-related challenges did the Jacksonville Transit Authority encounter from March through May? And what mitigation strategies has the authority deployed for system-wide cleaning, disinfection, to ensure the health of its customers and also its workforce? And how have these strategies changed over time?
Okay, and first let me start with saying thank you for the opportunity to share some of my thoughts in terms of the pandemic and more specifically the industry as well as the JTA and how we've been trying to navigate our way through this. And you know, the first initial challenge we faced was a significant drop off in terms of our ridership on our system, and we saw about a 75% drop off in terms of ridership. So with that, as a cost-saving measure, we immediately went from a weekday schedule to what we call a Saturday schedule, which is a significant reduction in the amount of service we provide. And at the same time, though, because we recognized very early on that there were large numbers of citizens and customers in terms of our community that were, in fact, supporting the hospitals, medical centers. They were supporting the fire department and our police department, as well as a lot of the retail operations as it relates to grocery stores and things of that nature. So we had to ensure that we were able to get these people to work as efficiently as possible. And so there was no question that one, we did need to maintain our service, but we did have to modify our schedule. And later on, I'll share with you that that became more and more of a challenge as you know, the safer at home orders that initiated that initial drop off in ridership as those safer at home orders started to get relaxed and we started seeing ridership creep up, then it became a bit of more of a challenge in terms of some of the strategies we implemented. In terms of our facilities and our buses, our rolling stock, as well as our Skyway people mover system, we had to significantly increase the amount of cleaning that we were doing, not just for our customers, but also for our operators and our employees. And so our facilities, our rolling stock, our any of the touch points in our operation are being cleaned several times a day and disinfected several times a day. We had to also make some structural changes as it relates to our infrastructure, reducing the amount of increasing the amount of distancing for our customers related to our bus stops and our hubs and our stations to ensure that we created the 6-foot social distancing. And that was a bit of a challenge in terms of designing, what would be the appropriate spacing. And on board our vehicles, for example, we reduced the, vehicle capacity from our normal 50 or so passengers down to about 20 passengers. So greater than half of our capacity on our vehicles was removed from service to create that social distancing on our vehicles. Our employees, during this same time frame, significant impact on our employees, obviously, in terms of their own morale and their concern about the safety of themselves as well as their families. And so we were fortunate to have PPE, personal protective equipment available to all of our operators. So fortunately, we had masks that we deployed immediately. So they started wearing face masks. We started sourcing hand sanitizer and made that available to our employees as well as to our customers at all of our hubs and at our major bus facilities and transfer facilities. And so it's just been a significant uplift of all of the strategies that I think a lot of our systems have deployed across the country. As it relates to our administrative employees, interestingly enough, in March, we were planning on opening up our regional transportation center. We had recently completed the construction of our regional transportation center, the JRTC, Jacksonville Regional Transportation Center. We delayed the opening of that facility, both for operations and for our administrative staff. And some of the infrastructure improvements that I mentioned earlier related to social distancing and hand sanitizer dispensers, we took that additional time and delayed the opening so that we can put the infrastructure in place, but we also did infrastructure improvements in the administrative headquarters right above this facility. And the spacing as it relates to cubicles and making sure we have plexiglass between cubicles and making sure that we set up the appropriate social distancing as it related to using elevators in our facility. And then as it relates to our employees, when they came back, when we started bringing them back to work last month, we put them on a split schedule with an A team and a B team. The A team would come in on Monday and Tuesday, lessening the burden of crowding in elevators as well as restrooms and things of that nature and spacing in some of our office areas. There was an A team and a B team, and A team Monday, Tuesday, and a B team Thursday, Friday. We also checked their temperatures, and now all employees, including our administrative personnel, have their temperatures checked as they report to work. And as a minimum, they have to wear PPE face coverings while they're at work, both our operators and all of our administrative staff. And then again, a great deal of cleaning and disinfecting that is going on here at the JTA. So a lot to cover.
Are you keeping this A team, B team arrangement going now as well? Or has that been?
We once we started bringing our administrative folks back to work, we continued with the A team, B team split. We do have some employees that, due to family circumstances, we do continue to have them work from home if you request it as an employee because of, how would you say, susceptibility, or because someone is in a immune suppressed capacity in their home. We do allow them to get exempted from coming to work. Fortunately, one thing I want to point out, we were in a very unique situation because we had this brand new regional transportation hub that we had just really were getting ready to have a major ribbon cutting on. We were able to delay that opening, go in and put decals on the ground so that people knew where to social distance. We were able to also at the same time put in large hand sanitizer stations. And then again, we were able to do some improvements in the building. So we were able to redesign the facility to support support healthy sanitation and things of that nature at our new facility.
So during that period, what would you say have been the most challenging operational aspects? Has it been the ability to maintain a cleaning schedule? Has it been really the health of workers, adjusting schedules to address ridership patterns? You said you moved to a Saturday schedule, or possibly other events external to the health situation, like protests, for instance. And I don't know how, whether that was a factor in Jacksonville at all, as it has been, say, in places like, DC and Chicago and others.
Exactly. Our biggest challenge was scheduling because, the Saturday schedule doesn't have an AM peak period or a PM peak period that would be the normal type of transit pattern or a ridership pattern that we normally see. And so a Saturday schedule is pretty flat throughout the day in terms of frequency of service and availability of vehicles. What we saw, particularly in the morning rush hour and the evening rush hour periods, concentrations of customers that unfortunately, when we went to a restriction of no more than 20 passengers on a vehicle, we were passing up passengers and we weren't serving the ridership as they needed. And so we then started a process of putting in what we call plug buses or extra buses on certain routes at particular timeframes to actually alleviate that crowding situation that we would have, or the pass up situation we would have on that bus. So we were able to maintain the 20, no more than 20 per passenger, but it was a challenge because you had to really look at the travel patterns, and ridership was down, but we started seeing it slowly creep back up as Florida started to reopen. And as you know, we started to reopen rather quickly, and folks were actually coming back to the system. Now, one thing that I would point out, we were very fortunate also in this aspect. We have a very robust business intelligence unit that supports the entire JTA in terms of our entire operation. And they look at financial issues, operations, maintenance, customer service, things of that nature. Using our the data that we normally collect in terms of ridership and that data, we were able to quickly pinpoint where we were missing that, what we call load adherence. So we were able to maintain that no more than 20 per passenger in the high 95 to 100 percentile. And so we felt comfortable with that because we were able to pinpoint where we could put in extra buses. Subsequently to that, after we got enough experience, we then redid the schedules, and every so often we still have that challenge where we need an extra bus, but for the most part we have it well in hand. We are developing the schedules and plans that says if we go up another 5 to 10% or 20% in ridership, what will be that redone schedules to support that.
So looking at the current period, June, July, I guess, this summer, JTA recently announced the requirement for face covering on board and at facilities. And you've mentioned the social distancing on the buses. Are you still maintaining the distancing on the buses? And are there other ways that the agency is approaching the notion of socially distant transit ridership? In fact, is that a hard restriction, the distancing, as well as the the masks? And is it more of a desirable target when possible? And would be interested in, I guess, your experience in that regard so far, particularly in how cooperative riders have been.
Interestingly enough, our riders seem to appreciate that we've finally made that decision to make it mandatory to wear a mask. And in fact, when we do have a situation where a customer is not wearing a mask, we've asked our operators not to get into an altercation with that customer, to seek a supervisor. We've also provided our operators masks as well as the supervisors so they can on the spot distribute a mask to a customer. One of our hesitancies at the very beginning as it relates to the deployment of masks is that while we as an agency were able to source and get masks and have them available, a large percentage of our customers may not have had access to a mask or a face covering. And so we wanted to make sure that that was in place before we restricted our customers to, required our customers mandatorily to wear a mask. Mm-hmm. What we found is customers seem to appreciate it. And I think because we supplemented and made masks available, it's not been an issue for us. We were contemplating that because as we started seeing our ridership slowly creep back, we were getting into a challenge in terms of having enough buses and enough operators to maintain that 20 passenger social distancing. So we are also considering, is 30 with a mask sufficient? Now, we're not scientists and we're not doctors, but we're trying to really pay close attention to what other agencies are doing, what are some of the recommended practices, because, for a lot of our customers, a significant number of them, they don't have an alternative in terms of public transportation. And so we are struggling with those decisions almost on a daily basis, but I think we're in a good, comfortable spot right now.
So how is the distancing actually enforced? Is it self-enforcing, or are you closing off seats, or you basically hope that people are good citizens and will naturally distance?
Yeah, we are closing off seats. And so we actually have a decal on seats to actually create that spacing and that distancing. And it's worked so far. And, very early on, some challenges in terms of, pass ups and leaving a passenger at a bus stop because we didn't have enough spacing. But fortunately, we've been able to rather immediately, because if you look at it from this perspective, with us running a modified schedule, it's somewhere between a Saturday and a weekday schedule. With running, we have a significant number of additional operators and vehicles. Now, we do run to a certain point. We will be, frankly, using as many vehicles and many operators as we're running a weekday schedule because we have that 20 passenger limitation, but we haven't approached that point yet. As we see ridership start to grow, we'll have to make that tough decision as to maybe upping that limit from 20 to 25 or 30 passengers.
So we've been tracking data, I guess, from around the world in terms of how transit ridership is picking up. If you look at data from the EUITP, the international organization, European cities, which sort of have entered reopening perhaps earlier, have seen rebound to somewhere between 70 to 30%, I guess, of pre-COVID levels. I'm not sure we're quite there yet in US cities in terms of 30% of pre-COVID, but I'm wondering if the JTA is looking to some of these other cities for potentially useful operational and messaging practices, or are those cases not really relevant, I guess, to a context like Jacksonville?
We are looking at that. In fact, we have instituted also during this time frame an opportunity to reimagine the JTA and really look at currently, our operations pre-COVID, looking at our current status now in terms of our day-to-day operations, but more importantly, what is our strategy coming out of the pandemic to attract ridership back to public transportation. And so there's no one size fits all for any agency. I think every community is uniquely different. However, what we've done starting about a month or so ago, we started hosting our own expert panel pop-ups, what we call them, where we bring in industry experts from a number of disciplines, including international thought leaders, international perspectives related to public transportation. So our senior leadership team, I guess once a week, I think is the schedule now, there is 3 or 4 industry leaders who will talk to our folks in a virtual WebEx format and give them an opportunity to hear what's being done in other parts of the country, hear what's being done internationally, and then be able to ask questions on what strategies are being done to restart or reimagine public transportation. And so it's been very helpful to us as we develop our post-COVID strategic plan. And I think right now we're at about 60% in terms of ridership level. And we are looking at how we can grow that ridership, but it probably will not look exactly like the transit system that we operated pre-COVID. And we're looking at this crisis as an opportunity for us to reimagine our operation and look at new and creative ways to deliver our services.
So how are you soliciting feedback from riders to gain insight about operations, about their experience under these situations? And how is this helping, I guess, if you are engaging with your ridership, is this helping to create perhaps more confidence in the public in general? And are there any formal, I guess, customer satisfaction tracking programs underway, or is it mostly anecdotal, ad hoc type of approach?
Very good question. And so our customers are extremely active on social media, and they have not hesitated to tell us if something is wrong or if they need assistance. But more, I would say that through this pandemic, we have received a great deal of positive feedback in terms of the actions that we've taken, the heightened level of communications, using everything from flyers to public address announcements to social media and the media in terms of actually pushing press releases and communications to our television media here in Jacksonville. And so we've opened up communication channels that have given us great insight on any issues or any trends that may be occurring, whether it's overcrowding on certain routes or not enough social distancing. For example, this morning, I actually got an email from one of our customers, and he's one of our regulars, directly to me about, unfortunately, yesterday early morning, we had a passenger who did not have a face mask, and the operator made a decision to allow them to ride, and this customer felt uncomfortable about it. And so we were able to immediately respond to that particular issue and try and resolve that within the next 24 hours. And so we make our changes as quickly as possible. We actually, prior to COVID, a few years back, made an investment in what we call See and Say. It's an app that our customers have where they can take a picture or they can directly text us and send us an issue, so they don't have to go through the normal customer service channels or social media. They can reach directly to our safety and security personnel. And then we have our normal survey process that we go through on an annual basis, and we're actually getting ready to kick that off. It usually happens this time of the year, and that is our more formal survey process. But between our operators, customers, and social media and their communications, and then communications to our customer service center, we're getting a great deal of feedback in terms of what how our operation is looking. And I also want to mention again our business intelligence unit that every day scours our customer service management system and customer relationship management system, and gets feedback in terms of what are the top complaints, where are they located, what route, what time of day, and we're able to quickly respond to that feedback.
So I'm going to stay with this theme of data collection, I guess, and feedback. Looking ahead, beyond the current situation, June, July, looking, medium term to even to longer term post-COVID, hopefully, since we're still with COVID at this point, but we're looking beyond COVID. Could you tell us about, you've already told us a little bit already about the kind of data that you're using and the role of the business intelligence unit that you have. Can you tell us maybe more about how the organization might be using data to monitor ongoing progress and developments? What kind of data, in a perhaps more systematic way? How is it collected, and how much of it was underway pre-COVID anyway? And are there any innovations or data-driven strategies that you might be pursuing at this time to manage service and communication with customer? For example, you mentioned the app, but apparently you've had that for some time. That may in fact be a very powerful tool to engage and communicate and personalize messaging with customers. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the organization is doing in that regard?
Exactly. And so our business intelligence unit started about 5 years ago because, you know, as an agency of the JTA size, we collect so much data, you know, literally thousands and thousands of data points as it relates to our operations, our finances, customer relations, you name it, in terms of data collection, ridership trends, things of that nature. The challenge is, how do you take all of that data and put it in, well, one, ensure that it's accurate, two, that you have the appropriate measurements, and three, how do you aggregate all of that data in a way that assists management as well as our executive leadership team in making good, sound decisions, and actually really sifting through some of the data noise, because there's things that you collect as part of the process of operating, but it may not be very relevant in terms of decision making. And so how do you properly weight that data? And so about 5 or so years ago, we began with one individual that we hired, our director of business intelligence, and we started developing this team through interns that we interviewed and hired from our top collegiate enterprises here in Jacksonville in Northeast Florida. You know, the top students as it relates to economics, as it relates to mathematics, statistics, things of that nature, and brought them on board to start working with this gentleman. And out of the 4 or 5 interns that we brought on board, we would hire permanently the top 2. And we began that 5 years ago, and it is now developed into a business intelligence team that is embedded in each of our different divisions: our automation division, our operations, finance, administration, human resources. And those business intelligence analysts actually take all of those different pieces of data and then they sift through it, aggregate it, and again, check it for accuracy. And now we have built a real-time data information system that's called Emilio, which is actually takes all of these thousands of data points, aggregates them into about a dozen different categories or so that actually give us the macro trend as it relates to customer service, operations, finance, employee success in terms of HR and training and those data points. And we as an executive team are able to better measure and manage these trends that are occurring to the agency. So when we started seeing, for example, pre-COVID, we started seeing a trend related to our finances. We are funded by sales tax and gas tax, and we could see that from an economic standpoint, or financial standpoint, a slowing of the growth that we were experiencing in terms of our revenues. We saw that in the January, February timeframe, that's slowing. The ridership impacts that we're having, we know by route, by time of day, which routes seem to be, you know, when you say an average of a 75% drop in ridership, that wasn't equally across the entire system. It was on certain specific routes. We were able to identify what routes were being more heavily impacted by the ridership decline, and we were able to make those adjustments. We also were able to use these data points in our contract negotiations. And so as it relates to safety, on-time performance, customer service, in our contracts with our unions, and this is rather unique, they actually have performance measures in their contracts related to safety, customer service, and on-time performance. And they're part of their compensation is impacted by their performance related to those categories. And so it is something that, as the JTA is part of our DNA and how we've been so successful, is that we do an exceptional job, I believe, in terms of managing data, missed trips, on-time performance, the load adherence activities that I mentioned earlier. It took us a week or two, but we had the data already being collected. We know it's clean data, and we just need to mine it and then produce the additional or modified report that gives us a laser-like focus in those particular areas. And then we do some benchmarking with peer agencies across the country to confirm or adjust our strategies. And so we're very proud of Emilio. We actually built it in-house with our business intelligence unit and a number of consultants. And it's actually something that, we actually are working with the state of Florida, that our Emilio platform will be the platform that is used by the state of Florida to monitor public transportation here and make sure that we're all on the same, using the same criteria and same measuring stick in terms of measuring our performance.
Yeah, it's really impressive, I think, the way you have built that unit, going from interns and then retaining some of them to stay with the organization. And I wish more agencies did that and emulated, I think, your approach, because there certainly is more, an increasing role, I think, to utilize data in a systematic way in improving public transit.
One thing I would add to that is there's multiple benefits that we found from this. Obviously, starting from scratch, building this data intelligence unit, picking the cream of the crop in terms of the students in certain disciplines that would lend themselves to business analytics and intelligence. I think another part of this, another benefit has been the infusion of young creative minds into the organization. So you take a gentleman like myself with a great deal of kind of practical experience over decades, and I'm able to network and spend time and talk with these younger individuals in terms of their perception on public transportation, trends that they're seeing from a generational standpoint. And it also, from an internal standpoint in our organization, it keeps us nimble, keeps us bright, it keeps us well informed as to trends that, based on demographics, we may not be privy to or be able to see. And so they've been a great group of folks, young folks to work with in our organization, very energetic, and they ask the questions that we may not think to ask. And it's been very refreshing for our organization. That's
excellent. So you mentioned revenue and of course, one source is Farebox, and I realized that during the current period, the system has gone to a no-fare policy. I believe I saw on the website.
No, we never stopped. We never stopped charging fares. No.
Never stopped. Okay, all right. But in any case, certainly fares have the revenue from fares have dropped because of the drop in ridership. How have federal and state programs helped, I guess, mitigate funding issues? And what is the outlook for continued support?
You're right. And thank you for that question also. In terms of Farebox revenue, we were fortunate, and I think this is important as to why we're still charging fares. A lot of our peer systems around the country stopped charging fares to create social distancing between the customers and the operator by having passengers come through the back door. Fortunately, prior to COVID, almost a year prior to it, we had installed plexiglass barriers for our bus operators, largely due to what was seen nationally as a rash of attacks on bus operators by irate passengers or criminals, frankly. And with that, we made the investment to put the shields in all of our vehicles. And so it allowed us to continue to collect fare revenue. Yes, our fare revenue is down, and so is our other main sources of revenue. We receive a local option gas tax here in Duval County, as well as a half-penny sales tax in Duval County. People are staying home, they're not shopping as much or driving as much, so our sources declined very rapidly. We are extremely thankful that the CARES Act passed. For the JTA, it represents approximately $43 million in revenue. We have applied for, and the way that that program works, you have to submit applications and apply for the grants to ensure that that funding is being utilized to supplement, replace lost revenue, additional costs related to cleaning and disinfecting and things of that nature. And so we have been able to submit our fourth and last application just last week. And so all, the entire $43 million are spoken for. This fiscal year, we will finish our budget in the black, and then we are using a portion of that money to supplement fiscal year 21. However, we've implemented some pretty aggressive cost containment measures to help out with our budget. This next year, we will have furloughs for our senior managers and executive staff, 2-week furloughs. We asked all of our consultants this particular year, or consultants and vendors, this year as well as next year, for them to make significant cuts in their actual costs for services that they provide to us. And so as well as no merit increases or raises this year and next year. And so we're doing all that we can to avoid any layoffs here at the JTA or significant reduction in services. We do have another service change that will occur on October 1st. Beginning of October, another service change. Again, trying to right size our services to the passenger levels that we're seeing. But it is a challenging time from a financial standpoint, and we're preparing for the worst and hoping for the better outcome.
So staying with strategic themes, I guess from a planning perspective, one of the discussions or debates currently in the transportation planning community is whether travel patterns have changed permanently. Of course, we know there's been all the work at home type of activities, a lot of telework that has been going on, particularly, because of the stay-at-home orders and so on. And in the past, there's historical precedent in the sense that every time there's been a major disruption someplace, whether it's an earthquake, Olympic Games, and so on, and there are adjustments, people say, well, things will never be the same because now people have gotten used to teleworking, and almost every time things do go back to what they were before those disruptions. And so do you see a similar return to typical work and travel behavior, or is this time really different?
No, I think this time is really different due to the duration. So you're right, earthquakes, in our particular case, hurricanes here in Florida, different events across the country that I've worked with for, decades. They're short in duration, and people then return back to their normal behaviors prior to that disruption. I think that may change with COVID. I think our administrative employees, they've been working from home. They didn't miss a beat when they started teleworking in March. It has given us the opportunity to really rethink, the workplace as we know it today. And so is there an opportunity to reduce our physical footprint and have a number of employees actually work from home? They seem to be working very well in terms of employee communications each week, and our vice presidents are managing their workforces different because they have different needs. We've held series of town hall meetings and panel discussions, as I mentioned, with industry experts. And so we've been able not to miss a beat. And I would imagine other businesses are similarly experiencing the same change in behaviors. And so once this pandemic slows down, our employees in general may be working in a different environment. We are trying to plan for that as part of our strategic planning efforts post-COVID. And so we're actually working right now with a number of consultants and industry experts to start thinking about what does transportation look like going into the future? Is it shorter trips? Are there different platforms we should be using in terms of not a 40-foot bus, but a smaller shuttle? And I think you may have heard a great deal about the work we're doing with autonomous vehicles. And is there an opportunity for us to not just look at moving passengers or customers in our particular case, but is there an opportunity for us to move goods move goods in our community. We have done during this pandemic, we've actually, as the JTA, delivered meals to folks who have been shut in. And we've done that in support of our city and our community. So we're looking at rethinking everything that we do and how we do it. And, it's, unfortunate crisis here, but there is an opportunity to really look into the future, and the possibility is definitely there to provide services that were better, significantly better, and more customer oriented than what we have had in the past.
So staying with this rethinking, I guess, transit and its role, do you see an opportunity for enhanced cooperation with ride-hailing providers, TNC providers, or possibly bike share services to enable mobility for maybe non-essential travel in the near term, but also in the long term, because we have seen sort of that competition, I guess, really taking place between the Uber and Lyft of the world and conventional public transit, but we've seen areas where there has been also some attempts to provide complementary services, where perhaps in very low density areas, perhaps you rely on more flexible forms of transportation. Could you comment on that?
Yes, and just before I leave your last question, I mentioned that we were delivering meals as the JTA as part of our COVID operation. I don't know how I missed this, but definitely another crown jewel in terms of our operation is our autonomous vehicle program that we have over at the Mayo Clinic, where we're actually transporting COVID test samples and specimens from their drive-through testing to their laboratory at the Mayo Clinic. And so, as the JTA, we do see that there is an opportunity in the future for us to embrace and or provide services far beyond what were our previous portfolio of services pre-pandemic, pre-COVID. And so I wanted to make sure I touched upon that. And there was a lot of national attention about that. So I would imagine.
Well, that was actually my next question about your partnership with Green Power Motor Company and Perrone Robotics to develop and deliver a fully autonomous EV Star Shuttle to Jacksonville. How are you envisioning then the integration of autonomous buses into your overall service strategy? Now, you said you're using it for, of course, specialized, I guess, specific types of needs, but how do you envision integrating that in the long run?
Well, I'll combine the two questions. I think going into the future, the partnership between agencies like the JTA and the private sector, and be it through TNCs. In fact, we have right now, we have a system called Ready Ride that is actually a on-demand service that's being provided in our communities that are less dense and do not support the need for a conventional transit bus from a size and ridership perspective. And so those partnerships with TNCs, the JTA has started that some time ago because we find that they provide a better, more customer appreciated service, and it's on demand, and it's I think it's a greater level of mobility for everyone. So we believe in those partnerships in terms of the public sector and the private sector networking, augmenting, and enhancing our transportation network. I also think they can be a bit more nimble, and I think the cost structure is a lot better for our operation. As it relates to our autonomous vehicle program, nothing is more in line with the future of transportation than our AV program. And it started out as an effort to deal with the aging Skyway system in downtown Jacksonville. And once a decision was made to not only maintain the Skyway, but to modernize it and look at expanding it into the future, that's where our U2C, our Ultimate Urban Circulator program, was developed. And over the past 3 years or so, we've been running test vehicles on our test track to determine what is going to be the proper vehicle and strategy for converting our Skyway, the monorail system, converting it to a highway at elevation, and be able to put autonomous vehicles on this elevated 2.5 mile highway and then convert it, get it down to street level, and then expand it into the neighboring neighborhoods to downtown. And out of our test and learn program, we've tested a number of vehicles. One of the challenges we found is that, we need to have a vehicle that can operate in mixed traffic. On the elevated skyway, on the elevated highway structure, yes, it's dedicated, but we do expect these vehicles to operate in mixed traffic with automobiles and trucks. And this partnership, as it relates to Green Power Motor Company in Perone, is to develop a vehicle that is already street worthy. And so a lot of the shuttles that you see, or a lot of the autonomous vehicles you see right now, they're great on the Mayo campus, where we're moving the COVID-19 specimens. They're great on a college campus, where our partnership with Florida FSCJ, Florida State College in Jacksonville, closed campuses. But we do need a vehicle, we will need a vehicle that is street worthy by the time we launch our program in the next 3 years, our Bay Street Innovation Corridor. And so these vehicles are already street worthy. They're actual, vehicle that is going to be converted to be autonomous. And, I could spend an hour on this subject alone and this AV program, but this is the future. And as we look at, pandemic, and dealing with keeping our operators safe and healthy and keeping our customers safe and healthy, automation is going to play a role in that going into the future. I like to lead what we're doing here with, I think, finally, it's not going to be an easy path. And I think it's going to be a challenge for the JTA. And so our automation team is working very, very hard to perfect our plans. But I think this is going to be the future. And we are working very hard to help our industry and help our country prepare for the future. And automation will be a part of that.
That is really exciting. We'll have to do another panel just dealing with that, because that's certainly, again, it's forward looking, and it's a very impressive, I think, initiative that you've started in that regard. We'll definitely be back and discuss that topic. This has been extremely informative, and in many ways also, yeah, I appreciate the sort of the upbeat, I guess, way that you're approaching this this issue and this problem, and very much impressed with your leadership in this period, and just generally in terms of the transit industry. So, do you have any final thoughts for us today?
Well, once again, thank you for the opportunity to be part of this panel and speak with your audience. And, we're clearly in some uncharted waters right now, but I think we're handling it well from an industry standpoint. APTA, the American Public Transportation Association, is holding a number of webinars and pulling us all together so we can compare best practices around the country. UITP, our international colleagues, and the work that they're doing to actually help us see what is happening across the world. And so I'm ready for us to get through this situation. And I think, again, we'll come out better for it on the other side. And so, again, thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts.
Thank you very much, and all the best going forward. Okay, thank you to all our speakers, and thank you to the audience who have stayed with us during this very informative and long set of interviews. But again, the information was, I believe, very valuable. This is the part where we go live. Again, those who have stayed with us will be able to participate in a Q&A session. We have already been receiving various questions through the Q&A box. I'd like to introduce our Senior Associate Director, Brett Johnson, who has been monitoring these questions and will be addressing them to our speakers who are here with us. So we do have Peter Cafiero from WMATA, as well as Dorval Carter, President of the CTA, and I believe Oh, and we have also Mr. Ford with us. So perfect. So we'll again, thank you to all our speakers for the time they spent during the interview and all the information. And Brett, you want to take it over and move with the questions that you have?
Sure. And again, I want to thank everyone for sticking around. We've got a really good audience here still. We've got a lot of good questions. We're probably not going to be able to get to all of them today. I'm also going to ask questions that all of the agency leaders can address. So they'll be presented in maybe more generic form, even if people ask questions about a specific agency. So the first question has to do with schools. And I know Peter addressed this earlier and he can address again, but we're interested in everyone addressing a question about schools. And, you know, it seems inevitable that many students are going to have to go to school at least part-time in the fall. You know, that's still unfolding right now. And we're wondering, one of the question is wondering, what kind of plans are you thinking about right now to be able to enable students to get to school? Is that anything different that you're doing for the general public, or just what are your thoughts on that? Maybe we can start first with Mr. Carter. He's not muted, but I can't hear him. Can anyone else?
No.
No.
I can't hear him either.
No, I can't.
Mr. Carter, we can't hear you. So how about if I ask Mr. Ford to address it, and then we'll see if we can get you on board.
Okay. Well, thank you for the opportunity again. And interestingly enough, the vast majority of children here in Jacksonville, we're here in the Southeast, the Duval County Public School System actually runs its own bus system. So our ridership as it relates to school-age children or students isn't as large as it may be in some of the more northeastern urban transit systems. However, you know, it's one of the things that we are paying attention to, because if they do run into a challenge, if there's some level of social distancing, we have thought about this in terms of how we could come to assist in terms of helping them provide the social distancing, supplementing their bus systems. We haven't had formal conversations yet, but as part of our kind of strategizing for the future, there may be that need, and we want to see if we can step into that gap.
Thank you. Mr. Cafiero, how about WMATA?
So we're putting together right now a pick for what we call our managed reentry service plan that will go into effect towards the end of August. And we won't be running 100% of normal service because we want to keep some staff in reserve, both for potential lower or higher absentee rates, depending on the progress of the virus, but also to give us some flexibility to adjust where we need to. So we will have school trips in that based on prior years, but have some ability to move around depending on what might pop up. To the extent there's less than normal school ridership, that will make it easier, but our concern is more that it's at a different time, different day than what we would normally plan for.
Well, since the question came from a participant from Chicago, we really would like to hear the CTA's view on this. President Carter, hopefully you're now unmuted and we can hear you. Nope, still not working.
I want to suggest that, you know, my engineering suggestion is to log out and re-sign back in, and I'll re-promote you to panelist, and we'll see if that makes your audio connection work. We'll come back to this question. Okay, let me move down to another second question, but we can go back to Mr. Carter for that school question. So there have been a couple questions about managing station density and how to communicate density. One of the questions, suggestions is, for example, providing some kind of a signage at stations for, say, green is safe, yellow it's, you know, you need to be concerned and maybe read if there's overcrowding. And a similar question came in of how, you know, how are we communicating to people who may not be as tech savvy with device, you know, on phones, or, you know, maybe they don't speak the language in your cities. So what are we doing might you be doing to help communicate density levels at certain stations through your systems?
Well, Peter, why don't you start off?
I'll start. I think that's still something we're thinking of. I don't really have, you know, a wonderful answer on that. Part of it is because we need to have a better sense in real time of what's going on ourselves. At the moment, we're not in an area where or a time where that's a problem, because ridership is still very low. We have been, as I think I mentioned in the interview, talking to some tech companies that sounds like Dorval was talking to as well, similar kinds of ways of looking at, for example, CCTV and being able to extract real-time information from that. So it's something that I think is certainly on our radar, particularly at our more crowded transfer stations. Metro Center, if you're familiar with DC, or Calvary Place, places that we often pre-COVID would have people having congestion and at escalators and things like that. So those are certainly things that we would like to consider. But you're raising a secondary point. So once we have that information, how do we communicate it easily to people? And certainly would love to hear what other people are doing on that.
Okay, I see that we have President Carter with us. Can we hear you?
Unfortunately, we still cannot hear you.
No, I don't know what to do.
Seems like you might need some tech support on your end. I'm sorry.
Perhaps is there a number you could call in? Like a call-in number?
It's not on our side.
Right, but you use a telephone to do the audio.
Oh, I see. Yes, the good point.
Yeah, Dorval, you may be able to, if you have the original invitation, there's a number to call. Maybe you can try that. And I'll try to, you know, I'll have to, if it's a Chicago number, I'll recognize it and I can promote you at least to audio. You want to try that? Okay, thanks. Mr. Ford.
Yes, so Peter hit on a couple of points. There are a number of tech companies that are working and developing, I guess, software systems that will allow us to take a look at passenger loading and crowding and things of that nature, and be able to provide some type of alert to our customers. We haven't gotten anywhere close to that point right now, but as it relates to communication, you're right. From a tech standpoint, you know, does someone have a device and can you communicate with them, and will they understand those communications? We've kind of gone low tech, at least in terms of our major transit hub. And what we simply have done is put decals saying sit here or stand here, and you can't sit here or you can't stand there, and using, you know, very low tech graphics that, you know, actually kind of tell the message or provide that message in a much simpler fashion. And it seems to have worked, at least for our agency. And interestingly enough, I think in the interview I mentioned that we were very fortunate because we were just getting ready to cut the ribbon on our new facility. It's actually over my shoulder in the background. And we delayed that opening, and it gave us an opportunity to really set it up for this new normal. I think fortunately it helped us condition our customers when we took them from our previous main transfer facility and hub and moved them into this new facility. We started conditioning the customers in terms of social distancing and things of that nature. So, but we'll keep our eyes as ridership starts to grow. We are kind of listening to what's happening around the world. And when that time comes that we need a technology to alert people well in advance that a bus may be crowded, or give them a choice of either riding it or or waiting for the next bus or Skyway vehicle, we'll provide them that kind of data.
So I'm trying a different way. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Absolutely.
Yes, we can.
absolutely. Perfect. Great.
Wow. I may not be a tech expert, but I can at least try a few things until I get something to work.
Excellent.
All right.
Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Well done. So going back to the first question was about what actions might your agency be putting in place to the inevitable that many students may be going to school, at least in some form, come August or September?
Yeah, the point I was going to make is that to some degree that depends on what the schools decide to do, which we still don't know here in Chicago. CPS has not announced what the process is going to be for kids going back to school. A number of kids in Chicago, as you know, don't necessarily need to take CTA to get to school. For those kids who do take public transportation to get to school, in many instances, we also add extra service during the school year to support that activity. And so once we get a better sense of what the plan is from CPS, the public school system, then we will start to figure out how we modify the traditional expanded service that we would normally provide during the school year to reflect that plan. You know, just like with businesses, we're obviously looking to encourage an approach that's not going to overwhelm the CTA at peak hours of the day. And depending upon what CPS ultimately decides, we're hopeful that it will be reflective of the fact that we still have capacity limits that we need to meet in order to basically keep everyone safe when they're riding the system.
And I assume you'd have teachers and employees at those schools as well who need to get there.
Correct.
Yeah, exactly. Great.
So, thank you. So I'm going to move on to another question. We have, you know, in all three interviews, we address some aspects of technology and some of the things that you're looking at to manage data and information. And one of our graduate students at the center, Moeen Hosseini, asks, he said, were there new initiatives or technologies that your agencies are planning to introduce, but due to the unexpected changes in demand and rider behavior in the post-pandemic area, are there technologies that you've either decided to delay implementing or completely abandon in light of the current circumstances?
I would say no. I think we continue to move forward with all of our implementations. We did delay the opening of our administrative building, and fortunately, the technology that we were embedding in that new facility really saved us in a lot of ways, because we were able to immediately telework and communicate remotely and be able to do a whole host of communication with our customers at the new facility. We had put in some smart technology to help them with passenger information and real-time information. So all of that was kind of embedded with this new facility, which we were building, the JRTC. And so we actually leveraged all of that. So we did not slow any tech projects, any infrastructure projects. We continue to move forward with all that was planned. And we may, in the long term, do some consideration related to, you know, rolling stock design. You know, that may come a little bit further in the future. You know, what type of vehicles, what type of services, but technology-wise, didn't miss a beat. And thank God we were really in the position that we were when the pandemic hit its main veracity for our community.
Mm-hmm. Peter, you want to take that one?
I can't think of anything that's been delayed or that we stopped. We sort of have opposite experience to Nats in Jacksonville. We are in an office building that was built the original Metro construction. It's state of the art for 1973. And so it was a massively challenging job to go to remote working. But then about 2 months into this, we had a fire that was fairly serious in that building. Fortunately, no one was injured, and there weren't many people working there because of the pandemic, but it severely impacted our technology as well. So a lot of us were remoting into computers into that building. And so we've been having to work around that as well. So it's affected a number of the internal processes, not so much our transportation service provisions, but some of those we had to do a lot of scrambling and workarounds. We were in the middle of producing a pick when that happened. Other technologies that we were working on, I think, they may have taken a small delay because of suppliers or other things, challenges as well. Everybody was affected by this. But we're still moving forward with mobile app for our fare payment, things like that. And I think there's no reason to, if anything, we'd want those to move faster.
And how about the CTA?
Yeah, no, I think I'm in the similar position as Nat and Peter. There's a lot that we were already working on, and I think I heard Nat speaking earlier about the fact that as an industry we're much more focused on technology and ways in which we can start to innovate in the ways that we provide services and tools to our customers. Those things continue to move forward, and in fact they become much more relevant today than they may have been pre-pandemic. Because they're going to enhance features that we already have in place, particularly around contactless payment, integration of mobility and things of that nature. I mentioned in my video comments about the fact that we're going to be rolling out an enhancement to our app that's going to allow an integration of Divvy Bike Share into our Ventra app. And so these are things that we had planned to do. They matter more now than ever before, and we're going to continue to accelerate them as best we can.
Thank you. Brett, you want to move to the next question?
Yeah. Our Andrew Bada wants to thank you all for the great discussions that you had with Hani. And he wanted to ask, have any of you had experiences with any actions you've taken or techniques you've applied that haven't worked during this pandemic situation? Or maybe anecdotally, what have some other agencies done that you've learned that, quite weren't up to par and you decided to take a pass, either one? I ad-libbed the second part.
It's hard to kind of pinpoint what's working well and what's not working well at this point, because every day is a different day. One thing I could say on the positive side, one thing that may be overlooked in all of this is, I think, the relationship with our rank and file and the unions. And I think very fortunate for us as the JTA, we are used to a couple of times, or at least once a year, dealing with a hurricane situation where our operators are being asked to come in and help evacuate citizens and things of that nature. And so we were able to very quickly get in a posture where they understood the importance of their role and responsibilities of doing their jobs. And I don't want to leave this panel without kind of at least pointing that out as something that was critical in the very beginning. And I know some of my colleagues around the country, even today, are still having challenges in terms of working through, hero pay issues and work hours and things of that nature. And so I think that worked well. Also from I think the issues are around the management, communication, and leadership type issues, because the pandemic is what it is, and you're just going to have to fight your way through it. But from a leadership standpoint, just last week, one of the things we've been dealing with is if you look at Florida, we're starting to kind of grow in terms of, we're clearly growing in terms of the number of positive cases. It is happening within our organization. So we're in the beginning, we had 1 or 2 cases back in the March, April timeframe. Now we're up to about 10 cases in total. And that's with our employees, and then contractors, we're probably at about 4 or 5 as I speak. And one of the things we did very early on was this, constant pushing out of information to our employees about, okay, we've had an employee who tested positive. This is where they work. This is who, this is their condition, obviously within HIPAA parameters, not disclosing who they are, but we thought it was very important to have that transparency to our employees. And I still think it's the right thing to do, but we discussed it last week that now that we're starting to have more and more cases, it seems like there's an email or, JTA all communication going out every other day. And are we creating a morale issue? And so I think that's the challenge in terms of, you can probably go back and second guess a lot of different decisions, but I think leadership in this environment is just going to be critical, and good discernment and transparency. And I just can't say anything that I would turn around and say I should have done differently at this point, or as an agency we would have done differently.
Peter, any lessons learned?
Well, one thing I think that certainly watched in Europe is they've come back, and I won't mention names of systems, but I've seen some press of some major cities in Europe where there were pictures of overcrowded rail vehicles, at least as considered by the public that was tweeting those pictures. So the challenge will be staying ahead of a curve that we don't know what the curve is in terms of people coming back. And so we've tried to be communicate that we can't deliver everything, that it's not, as Polita Feld, our general manager, has said, it's not like turning back a light switch and we're back to 100%, because we do want to not promise full service that we can't deliver. We still have a number of significant reduction in available employees for all sorts of reasons, so we have to manage through that and the uncertainty coming forward. So that's what we're going to try to manage over the next 4 or 5 months for sure.
Yeah, you know, I would echo a lot of what Nat said. I think the challenges have been around the lack of understanding of the virus and what it means in terms of the impact it has on our employees, our customers, and our operations. And so where we've had to pivot and really recognize, you know, this isn't working, we need to do something else, it's really been in that arena. I mentioned earlier about the fact that, you know, we started off thinking that masks weren't required. And, you know, there's a lot of communication between my employees and management around the need to require masks or to provide masks to employees at the very beginning, which obviously ended up being advice that changed over time. And we had to pivot quickly to start to ramp up the PPE that we gave them. You know, it has been issues around that. I mean, even today, we're now hearing that the virus itself may be more airborne than we thought before. And so I'm already having conversations around ventilation on my trains and buses. And do I need to make adjustments to that to reflect that reality? And I think all of us, and when I made the point before earlier in my remarks about the fact that there's no playbook for this, right. I think the point that I was trying to make is we are in a constant, almost daily review of everything that we do to try to better understand how we can improve it, modify it, or adjust to whatever the reality is that we're facing. And so, you know, I don't know that I necessarily view the changes as being mistakes as much as it's been recognition of the need to make adjustments and being flexible and open enough to understand that what you may be doing may not necessarily be accomplishing the goal that you set out to achieve, and being, you know, comfortable enough to say, you know what, let's adjust to something else. At the end of the day, I think Nat and Peter would agree, our number one priority has been to protect our employees and to protect our customers. And I'm willing to do anything that I need to do and adjust anything that I am doing that will better achieve that goal. And I think we'll all be continuing to do that as we move forward.
Dorval, just to follow up on that, to that point, I think every one of our incident management team meetings, you know, at the very end of it, I actually tell our folks, look, no decision we've made is in stone. So the thing is, if we need to make an adjustment, let's go back and revisit that decision based on the additional information or the changing environment that we're facing. But every day is a different day. We're trying to manage employee behavior, manage customer behavior, and then also fit into the framework of our city government and the framework of our state government. And there's also those different, I think, issues that come to play. And we're just a major part of the city infrastructure in our case.
Absolutely. Brett, do you have another good question?
Oh, I wanted to ask one that's kind of a follow-up to the discussion that's taking place right now, and I'm trying to go back and find it. So here we go. One question I wanted to know if you could all talk about a bit about the public perception of health safety riding your systems, versus the actual significant measures that you have taken to clean and disinfect your different rolling stock. Do you see some disconnects in what people's concerns are versus all the measures you're taking? Dorval looks like he's ready to respond.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I have seen is a constant need for us to educate the customers, the business community, all of our stakeholders about the things that we're doing and why we're doing them to make the environment as safe as possible. I mean, the practical reality around this virus is that all you can really work towards is mitigating the potential risk. None of us until there's a vaccine, none of us are going to be 100% sure about when or where you might ultimately get the virus if in fact that happens. And so everyone is in a mitigation game right now, which is what are the things that I can do that will minimize that potential risk, no matter what activity you're taking, whether you're talking about restaurants or you're talking about office buildings, you're talking about transit. We're all in the same game doing the same thing. And a big part of that is educating the people who use your system on how to use it safely, how to take advantage of the information we're giving them to make better decisions about how to use it safely, and then monitoring and making adjustments, as we discussed earlier, to improve on that. I mean, I think we all dealt with the reality of what people's perceptions are around public transit, but I'll tell you, there have been some terrific articles and research done around public transit and this virus that have pretty much made it clear that the public transit was not the reason that this virus spread the way it did. It didn't go through public transit as the vehicle. It was communicable enough without public transit one way or the other. And I think we do spend a lot of time educating the public about the fact that you can ride CTA safely if you take the right precautions and use it the right way. And I think that's the piece that comes down to personal accountability, where I can't police hundreds of thousands of people a day on how to ride CTA, but I can teach you what the best way is to use CTA, and then ask you to really apply that approach to your daily decisions about what you do on public transit.
And as you mentioned earlier, Dorval, the health experts haven't always helped because the story had been changing all along, yes. And there's been a lot of uncertainty from that side too. So when your inputs are so uncertain, it's difficult to make decisions that consider everything at the time. So absolutely. Peter, you want to take this one?
I think that in the DC area, there's, at least from the people I talk to and the building I live in and my own employees, there's a bigger concern right now is coming back to an office, activities. People don't just use transportation to use transportation, they're going somewhere. And so I think that's the first step, is getting comfortable in the destinations. What we see from our rider surveys is that people want to see, I think I mentioned this in the interview, want to see cleaning going on. They really, in an ideal world, you'd have somebody with a rag and a sanitizer following everybody around so they could see that. That's not the way it's going to work. So we have to use video and other means to show people that we're cleaning, and we have what we do overnight when they're not seeing us. That's going to be a challenge, and make sure we don't have the message that there has been a mixed message. In some other countries it was actually, I think, worse in terms of health officials saying just do not take rail transit or bus transit, but we need to as an industry get past that and get people back.
Mr. Ford?
I echo everything that was said by the two previous speakers, and I just would add that I think the visibility of cleaning is just so important, and I think one of the steps we took was to actually outfit our cleaners in white jumpsuits. So they're visibly kind of, you can see them doing their jobs. They were always there, frankly, but we have also partnered with Goodwill and, have brought on additional cleaners, and again, trying to just take what is not so obvious and make it very visible to our customers. But it will take a while, I think, for any entity, be it a restaurant or a theater or public transit, to recover and create that confidence in terms of the public overall, to be in close proximity to other people. And until we get a little bit further in this pandemic, and hopefully with a vaccine, it may be slower for some of the more denser facilities, but I think it gives us an opportunity to, one, I think what's important is the riders I have today that don't have a choice and need to ride every day, I better not lose any of them. And I think I need to focus on, I'm focusing on a daily basis with those folks, and that will hopefully in time build to getting the choice riders back.
So as a follow-up to this question, I'm gonna give a plug here to my idea, which is, why not have a third party essentially go around and test randomly in certain location, whether they're stations, vehicles, etc., and essentially say, we were not finding anything. The cleaning job is working. Just have an independent entity that is effectively randomly sampling the system, and that might then convey to the users that it's not simply the claims of the agency that we've applied the cleaning, it's that there is now an outcome. The outcome of it is that the likelihood of transmission is actually quite low.
It's not a bad idea. Sort of like a good housekeeping seal, huh?
Exactly.
Well, I think one of the ways that we're also doing that is by getting validation that the techniques we're using are also intended to achieve the desired result. I mean, many of us are, we're enhancing our cleaning protocols. We're using different tools like electrostatic, cleaning. We're using different types of solutions and things of that nature. And so there is a third-party validation that's a part of that process as well, which gets back to Nat's point about, but people need to see you doing it. And, I made the point earlier, we steal ideas from each other all the time. And so Nat's looking at what I'm doing, I'm looking at what Nat's doing, Peter's looking at what both of us are doing. And we're all sort of doing the same types of things. I'm doing the same thing around visibility. I've talked about branding the cleaning crews. I've tripled the number of cleaning crews that I have, and I've now moved them out of the terminals into stations and other locations so that people can see them. I think you're right. A big part of it is people feeling comfortable that they actually know you're doing what you say you're doing, while recognizing that, in my case, I got 275,000 people who are riding every day, and they're bringing with them whatever they bring with them every day. That's right. And so the cleaning process is also going to have to do with the reality of you got a lot of people using the system. But I think the more we can be visible in the efforts that we're undertaking, and the more that you can provide people with the tools, hand sanitizer, masks, the things that ultimately protect you against the possibility of getting the virus. Remembering that you can't get the virus by touching a handbar. You can get the virus by touching a handbar and then touching your face. So part of this is I know I keep preaching a personal accountability part of this, but a big part of what the messaging is throughout society right now is that you have to think about what you're doing and you have to do it in a responsible way. And transit is no different than a restaurant or a bar or going to the beach or anywhere else in that regard. And the people who are careless and don't follow the guidelines are more likely to possibly come in contact with the virus. That's the practical reality of what we're talking about.
Okay, thank you. Peter?
I think for address that
you want to help me out?
Oh, okay.
Oh, about the third party? No, I mean, I think that's an interesting idea. I'm certainly be supportive of anything we can do to get the message out there that we're doing a good job and we're not the problem.
We'll talk to FTA, I guess, and see what they think. Okay, Brett, do you have any closing questions here?
Well, I mean, there are a couple of questions I could ask Hani. I think we're probably down to our last question. Do you have a wrap-up question in mind, or do you want me to ask one of the last ones we've got here?
Ask one of the last ones.
Okay. So I think some of you may know Scott Bernstein. He's the founder of the Center for Neighborhood Technology in the Chicago area. And he said, running at half capacity implies increasing frequency of service. I know Nat kind of addressed this earlier. And this also is done to avoid crowding as more customers return, perhaps spreading or even eliminating peak demand. He's interested if you could all share your ideas on this concept and how you may implement it going forward.
Sorry, Dorval.
No, go ahead, Peter.
Go ahead, Peter.
So I think a couple things. One which I didn't mention up to now, but we've taken advantage of this low ridership time right now to do some intense work on the system. So we've actually been trying to both catch up and front load maybe a little of that. So as riders do come back, we'll have more ability to run more service. But at the end of the day, we have the number of vehicles that we have. And so we can run them more in the off peaks, but peak, we're ultimately going to be limited by what we have in vehicles and what we have in operators. So that's going to be the challenge. At some point, we will not be able to maintain even the theoretical capacity of social distancing, which we've all been using somewhat different numbers, but ours are similar to what you said CTA is in terms of people per rail car. It's a quarter of what our normal capacity would be. And so, at some point, we're not going to be able to do that. We certainly can't force people to stay 6 feet apart at all times. So these other things, cleaning, making sure people are wearing masks, those sorts of things become much more important. But we will run, particularly starting up in late August, as much service as we really can and commit to delivering. We'll reevaluate that in December and probably be in a position then to add even more service back and hopefully get to essentially full service. But the capacity at that point, it's going to be what it is. How much more we can, we can't go above what our resources are.
And Dorval, I believe you had mentioned doing some reallocation between routes that have higher capacity at this point, higher utilization.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing a lot of the things that Nat mentioned he was doing as well. We also have a very robust data collection process, data analytics process, very similar to Nat's. And so we were able to see very early on where we were seeing ridership challenges versus where we weren't. We took advantage of that, and this is really where communications with your unions and it's very helpful, because normally without getting into detail, there's a myriad of union rules about where people can work, what routes they can work, what buses they're allowed to drive, and all of that are driven by picking process and seniority and everything like that. A big part of our ability to respond to this was getting the unions to agree, and I'm extremely appreciative of this, to create the flexibility to allow us to move the service around the city to reflect where we were seeing the ridership challenges occurring. And it was primarily in minority communities in Chicago on the south and west side of the city, where bus ridership in particular was still at a fairly significant level, even though there are other parts of the city where it had dropped off to little to nothing. And so moving my bus service around, which I have the flexibility to do, which I can't do on rail. And also, a big part for us at least has been, we've been running full service, full train consist, every bus I can put on the street, because we've recognized the capacity challenges that we face. And one of the ways to support social distancing as much as possible is to put as much service out as you can. Other transit systems took different approaches to this. So as the city starts to come back, I don't have the ability to add more service. I have the ability to move the service I have around. But a big part of our effort has been working closely with the city and the phasing in which we've been approaching the reopening of the city to make sure it aligns with my ability to adjust capacity constraints and everything else. So the capacity constraints that I have in place right now are based on the fact that we're in phase 4 of the city's reopening. When we were in phase 3, my capacity constraints were much stricter. And as we go through phase 4 and we start to talk about allowing larger gatherings and things of that nature, my intention would be to adjust our capacity constraints to reflect that. And so a big part of this from my perspective is remaining in parallel with what the city as a whole is trying to do in terms of reopening and reflecting that in the way that we're trying to expand the use of CTA going forward. Recognizing that wearing masks and all the other things are going to be key to the success of all of that, because those are the things that allow you to say you can have, 30 people on the train instead of 22. So you need those other pieces in place, but it's a coordinated effort that involves more than just public transit to make it work. It requires the business community, the other local governments, any of your big employers, no matter who they are, to work with you to basically try to maximize your capacity as efficiently as possible under these trying circumstances.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think the intersection between what the city government or state government is doing and your actions as an agency is critical. And I think in our particular case, as we started seeing ridership slowly creep back, and I started getting concerned about our 20 passenger maximum and started seeing that growth, and then looking at the number of buses and number of operators, the question came up, okay, well, what if we get to the point now that we can't manage the 20 passenger maximum? At 25, do we, implement mandatory masks, or is it at 30 passengers per vehicle? Do we start implementing masks? So, and to a certain degree, you're playing this symphony as you're going along, because at the same time, I would have had some difficulty if I went to a mandatory mask strategy. At the same time, the city was basically saying masks were optional or weren't encouraging masks in our community. And so, I had to really thread that needle. Fortunately, last week, the week before last, our mayor went to a mask required mandatory in public. And that made it easy for us as the JTA. So now we do have our 20 passenger maximum. We're at full utilization of masks and requirement. So now as I go to 25 passengers per vehicle or 30 passengers, I'm in a much better posture. But again, it's that intersection in terms of what the city is doing and our community is doing in line. And I somewhat have to mirror that and not get ahead of our elected officials and what they deem, or our elected leaders and what they deem to be safe in our community. So it's a very difficult leadership challenge, but we're surviving it. But there are the technical limitations, I think, that Peter and Dorval basically stated, that at some point I will have maxed out all of my buses and maxed out all of my operators. And hopefully by then we're on the other side of this pandemic.
Well, this has been an extremely informative session for us today. I know we had also very good audience participation and attendance. Wanted to just ask if any of you had any final thoughts for us, like essentially any parting shots, I guess, before we adjourn. I want to keep this going for much longer, because again, we're learning so much, but I know you have it's getting late in the day. So Dorval, you want to start with any sort of parting shots for us?
Sure. I think, as I was listening to Nat speak about the challenges of trying to navigate all of this, that really speaks to the comment that I made, that we're kind of building the plane as we fly it. The intersection of the politics, the financial implications, the legal implications, the operational implications are what keep all of us up at night, in the middle of all this. But I think the one thing that I'm especially grateful for and couldn't say enough, and Nat mentioned this earlier about his team, is that I got a terrific group of people who support this agency every day, both the frontline employees, the executive management, the management, all of them are committed beyond belief, and have shown that commitment over the course of the last several months as we've had to deal with this thing. And none of us would be in a position to have any of the conversations we're having today if it weren't for all of them. And so, there's anything before I close my conversation here, is I want to acknowledge it and express my sincere gratitude and appreciation for the dedication of all the people here at CTA who have been working, literally 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to keep this service going, especially for those who had no other option. And when you talk about being a lifeline in a community, there's no better example of that than what we've been dealing with right now. And I couldn't be prouder of what the folks here at CTA have done, and certainly appreciate the effort that they've shown and the dedication they've shown over the period of this pandemic. Thank you, Dorval. Peter?
Well, yeah, thank you, Hani and Brett, for putting this together in Northwestern. It's good to be back with the Northwestern Forum. And I would second what Dorval said about his team in Chicago. Some alum are working for us in WMATA as well. But it's a small community of transit people, and we do all stay in touch and do share a lot, which is great. But the employees are, what make it work, and everyone in Washington, from the bus operators and train operators, people in the control centers who have been under intense pressure in all of this, as well as my planning staff and my colleagues in the other parts of the administration. Without all that, we couldn't produce this. And what I think, one of the things that's really come out of this is how critical transit is to keeping things going that we all take for granted. Like, it's not just, it's hospital workers and healthcare workers, but it's the person down the street that I can walk to the supermarket, but there's somebody there that's got to be staffing that supermarket. There are other parts of the city where people can't walk to the supermarket and need to take transit. So that's really come out of this, and hopefully that will be something we can leverage as an industry to make sure people don't forget that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for putting this together, because it's through these types of sessions that all of us feel some comfort. We're learning things. We're listening to each other, and by you convening this, it helps with us doing our jobs on a daily basis, and ultimately helping our communities survive this terrible crisis. I said it earlier, but once again, if it weren't for the team here at the JTA doing what they do, and at this point, I think echoing what Peter said and what Dorval said, if there was a question about the importance of public transportation pre-COVID, well, that question's been answered, because the hospital workers, the folks who are working in the grocery stores and supporting a lot of the folks that allow other people to stay home and work from home, if it weren't for them, we wouldn't be here. And so with that, I'm not going to take up any more time. I think it's all been said. This was great. Thank you for inviting me to participate, and thank you for pulling us together.
Thank you. And it's a testimonial to y'all's leadership, I think, in this space, that you could can keep this industry going and keep the service provided in our cities. So thank you again. The Roundtable webinar will be recorded and available for others to access, those who could not participate today. To our audience who may still be with us today, thank you again for your time. And we will meet again next week. We will continue with part 2, looking at the role of public transportation and reopening our cities, with a focus on the international experience. We will have the CEO from Vancouver, and we'll have a representative from London, Transport for London, as well as a representative of UITP who is in Brussels. So again, thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Take care, guys.